Hey, my name's Frostbreak. Today I wanted to talk about my experience with the Elder Scrolls Online as a new player. Not to get too deep into my own personal history, but I started playing the Elder Scrolls Online for real about 2 months ago. For the last 10 years, I've kind of always been playing Skyrim in the background. Right now, I'm actually trying a VR run for the first time. What they do to these guys in here, bro? You can cook them. So of course, I've tried ESO before, but I usually put it down after a few days of playing. I just always got bored of it very quickly. But I'm a huge Elder Scrolls fan. I want to enjoy this game, I want to explore the world, so I did what any normal person would do and locked myself into the game until I had 100% complete the first zone. Luckily, 250,000 people thought that was an interesting concept, and here we are today. As of this video, I've completed roughly 30% of the Elder Scrolls Online's base game content. Base game was released over 10 years ago, and that was my choice. I was committed to giving this game a real try, so I decided to start with the basics. I picked one of the 3 factions to work my way through, and also completed the MMO's overarching main campaign. I am not endorsed by Bethesda, I have never been sponsored by Bethesda, everything stated in this video is my completely unbiased opinion. I am a new player, I may get some stuff wrong, and you are welcome to correct me or disagree with me in the comments, so this is what I think about the Elder Scrolls Online. Let's start off by talking about the difficulty of the Elder Scrolls Online, an already controversial topic. Normally this wouldn't be my starting point, but there's some pretty important context you need to understand about how the leveling, difficulty, and progression are structured in this game. I'm copying the same format I did in my SWTOR video, so if this segment doesn't interest you, you can scrub along the timeline and skip to something that does. The Elder Scrolls Online on launch had various zones divided up by suggested level difficulty. This isn't a new concept. Most MMOs have areas that are harder or easier to complete than others. Elite enemies that are harder to kill than basic enemies, you get the deal. These standard progression systems are a staple in most MMOs because they give the player a sense of advancement. Do you want to test your skill against enemies you're underleveled for? Go ahead. Do you want to go back to the starter zone and one-shot all the mobs that were bullying you when you started the game? You can do that too. These systems give the player the freedom to choose if they want to do harder content or easier content. ESO had all of this on launch. In fact, here's a video comparison of me in the tutorial island fighting the same elite enemy with 2 different level 3 characters 9 years apart. I even copied the same attack pattern and tried to sync it up to drive my point home. Look in the difference in speed. I'm able to do this exact same elite enemy. Back in 2015, I'm running low on resources, I almost died, I was struggling. Compare that to today, where I'm in 0 threat of death, my mana is completely full, and I just stand there tanking all the hits I want. So what changed? As of October 2016, the Elder Scrolls Online decided to introduce the 1 Tamriel update. This update completely redid the combat system by adding level scaling, allowing you to go to any zone in the game at any time and competently complete any content. I would assume a major reason they did this is because they plan to drop their first major DLC, Morrowind, a few months later, and they wanted to give new casual players the ability to hop right into the brand new zone without needing to level beforehand. Marketing-wise and financially, that definitely makes sense, but unfortunately, in my opinion, this absolutely stripped the game of essentially any challenge during your standard casual content. In my series I've made playing the Elder Scrolls Online, I've had to strip myself naked going between zones to feel some sort of a challenge, and even still, fighting elite enemies and story bosses are an absolute joke buck naked. If you want a more difficult experience in the Elder Scrolls Online, you must do the group content. Whether that's dungeons, PvP, raids, or world bosses, those are all designed to kind of be done in a group, and the content is a little bit harder. But as I said, that does not make up a majority of the game. So this begs the question, if you're a casual or solo player, and all the content is equally difficult no matter where you go, is there any theoretical progression? So let's talk about the progression I've experienced as a new player. Let's go back to that boss I fought with my level 3 characters and try again with my current main character.
But I do, cub.
So yeah, if that wasn't clear, obviously your character's power level does increase as the game goes on, and I don't even have that great gear. Anyone who says you never get stronger in ESO is lying. However, saying that all enemies feel the same is much more warranted. This is an elite enemy I'm using as an example. I would kill any other elite enemy in the entire game just as fast. Elites basically all have the same stat pool since everything is scaled, and if you're running the same gear, they're always gonna feel the same. I haven't done any of the DLC content yet, but it's possible there's a handful out there that have some interesting mechanics, but you get my point. There is character progression, but since the enemies always feel the same no matter where you go, it's hard to tell if you're actually getting stronger or not. This is by far and away my biggest criticism or critique of the Elder Scrolls Online as a whole. If you look at everything this game has to offer, I'd argue at least 90% of it by design was created for the solo or hyper-casual experience. And to be completely unbiased, the solo and hyper-casual experience is exactly how I play. But because the game has this design philosophy in place, it feels awkward when it comes to inciting challenge within the player base. It's definitely a unique MMO, but I would go as far to say as it's more like an online RPG than a typical MMORPG. You can see other people while you're roaming around, but besides world bosses, there's not much reason in the overland to interact with the community. The content is too easy to require teamwork, therefore it does not incentivize communication or interaction with other players. There's no need for it. You can basically do everything yourself no matter where you are in the world. If you do want to interact with other people, you have to go out of your way to do dungeons, PvP, or raids. Now, this isn't necessarily a hot take, to say the least. The issue of overland difficulty in the Elder Scrolls Online has been spoken about time and time again since the 1 Tamriel update. I just happen to be experiencing it for the first time in 2024 as a new player. I'm not one to simply nitpick without a solution. If you want my suggestion to help alleviate this issue, here's my recommendation. ZeniMax has made their intentions very clear that they have no plans of moving away from combat scaling. In that case, I'd suggest implementing a similar system to Lord of the Rings Online. Lotro has this neat new system called Landscape Difficulty. This system allows players to pick a difficulty scaling multiplier that decreases outgoing damage and increases incoming damage. To reward you, the player receives increased XP gains and chances at better loot. The harder you choose to make your experience, the more rewards you can get. It also introduces new mechanics on just regular mobs depending on your chosen difficulty multiplier. Regular trash mobs have increased frequency of crowd control abilities, or they have enrage effects if they're not killed fast enough. This seems like a no-brainer and already fits really well with ESO's combat systems. Most of ESO's mobs have crowd control abilities and skill shots you could easily increase the frequency of. They could also tweak the loot drops to drop more than one set piece at a time from more challenging enemies. There are a lot of possibilities here, and since everything's already scaled in ESO, all you would have to do is input a multiplier, and it would work across all encounters already. They have the foundations in place to make this system work and surpass Lotro's capabilities, but that's just my suggestion. Okay, that was a bit of a rough start right out of the gate, I know, but I like this game. I know I'm 10 years late to the party, but I do wish for ESO to succeed. Probably because I'm going to have no hair left on my head by the time the Elder Scrolls 6 finally releases in 2077.
Dick.
ESO is also the only Elder Scrolls game out there that consistently puts out content for new players to experience in the canon universe, and we Elder Scrolls fans, we really just gotta take what we can. Let's change gears a bit and talk about something I really enjoy. The Elder Scrolls Online has a great story-driven narrative. Now, I will admit, I could be coping super hard and I would never know. I've spent thousands of hours in Skyrim. I've been playing Elder Scrolls games since I was 8 years old. I've literally read and own Elder Scrolls literature. My point is, I'm exponentially more invested in this fantasy world than most human beings on the planet. Now, to my credit, and to be fair, most MMOs that are known for strong storytelling are built off of existing content. World of Warcraft is built off of Warcraft. Lotro is built off Lord of the Rings. SWTOR is built off Star Wars. Final Fantasy, you get the point. What I'm trying to do here is set a precedent in saying that, of course, the story content in ESO isn't going to be as strong if you aren't aware of the world that's already established. The MMOs built off of an existing world by nature are going to have a much easier time telling stories and structuring narratives since parameters have already been set. You think of an MMO like New World, it doesn't have anything to back up its story. If you held me at gunpoint and asked me to tell you even the basic outline of New World's story after 70 hours of gameplay, I would be dead. I have no idea what it's about. ESO puts a strong foot forward when it comes to narrative design. I'm not saying everything is sunshine and rainbows. I definitely have gripes with some of the major storylines, and I always call it out in the respective videos I make. I've been vocal with my complaints, but I've also been vocal with my praises. The fact that I've been trying to replicate a single-player experience in an MMORPG and have been completely enjoying the experience is wild, and I can't emphasize that point enough. I turn off my HUD, I hide my abilities and my attributes. I do try my best to replicate the Skyrim first-person RPG experience, and it's pretty damn close. That is something I cannot say I've ever seen in another MMO before, and I've played quite a few. The voice acting, the impactful decisions, the world shaping, character relationships, optional side questing. Is it Skyrim? No. But it's the closest MMO I've ever played to give you that single player RPG experience most of us crave. If you've never played ESO before, or maybe you've never given the story content a shot, the best way I can describe it is it's like Skyrim, but without the sandbox. You can kill NPCs, you can steal, you can assassinate, you could even raid a town and eat everyone's corpses as a werewolf, but like most MMOs, you can't do that to important characters. I can't play a rogue in World of Warcraft, sneak up behind Anduin and assassinate him. That changes the story for everyone, and obviously isn't something commonly done in MMOs. And speaking of WoW, one thing ESO does really well is the lack of fetch quests, which commonly plague most MMOs on the market. There are, of course, fetch quests, but most questing content is tied to either the main story of the zone or a specific location. In this game, those are called points of interest. Points of interest are generally small stories encapsulated within themselves and are isolated within their designated area. Some side quests even give you mementos, which are unique collectible items that remind you of your experiences. I can't compliment this portion of content enough. It's truly something you just have to experience on your own, and it's such a breath of fresh air compared to most MMOs. I already mentioned this, but ESO gets a lot of praise for its high-quality voice acting. More specifically, it does get praise for having voice acting in general, a feature that's missing in quite a few flagship MMOs. I saw on Twitter the other day that there's over 200,000 lines of dialogue for each language in ESO. The only other MMO on the planet that has this beat is Star Wars: The Old Republic, which actually currently holds the Guinness World Record. In regards to ESO's voice acting talent, you've got Davy Jones as High King Emmerich, Dumbledore as the former Emperor of Cyrodiil, Dr. Octopus as Abnar Tharn, and so much more. They truly have a phenomenally star-studded cast when it comes to voice acting, more so than any other MMO I've ever played, including SWTOR. In ESO, every single line of dialogue is voice acted unless you're speaking with an inanimate object. However, ESO tends to follow the Bethesda formula for NPC groups, and if you don't know what that is, generally Bethesda hires 2 people for a wide array of minor NPCs. For example, Skyrim has 2 primary voice actors for most of the Nord guards in the entire game. So though you might be in Whiterun, Solitude, or Riften, you're going to hear the same voice. ESO does this too, except it's tied to an entire race instead of a small NPC group, which can be a bit of a turnoff. The 30% of the base game I've completed so far is through the faction of the Aldmeri Dominion, which composes of 3 races: High Elves, Wood Elves, and the Khajiit. I noticed the 2 voice actor Bethesda moment with most of the male High Elves and male Wood Elves. The female voice actors, in my opinion, have a much stronger range than their male counterparts. Although there's still only 2 of them, I almost never clocked the same female voice twice. They tended to do quite a bit better with making themselves sound older, younger, or maybe they had a different speech pattern. Again, we're just talking about minor NPCs here. A random quest giver, maybe a town guard, or just a passerby on the road. But the fact that every single voice line is narrated in ESO does sometimes cause a bit of an immersion break when you catch the same actor as a different character. But if you're a Bethesda gamer and you've played Bethesda games in the past, you're probably used to it. I don't know if you guys have ever played Black Ops Zombies, but Dempsey voice acts, I'm not kidding, like 5% of all the NPCs. Maybe because that's a big childhood game of mine, his voice is very easy to recognize, but I just hear him all the time.
Knock it off, Tank. Kids play this game.
Anyway, I do want to take a second and say if you are enjoying the video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you considered liking or maybe even subscribing. It really helps someone out as small as I am navigate my way through YouTube. This is kind of the first time I ever did content creation of this scale. This video itself is a culmination of over 200 hours of work and effort, and it'll probably be one of the biggest projects I ever undertake editing-wise. If you like these styles of videos and want to see my journeys through MMOs, more specifically ESO for the time being, consider sticking around. Huge thank you to my members who support all the content I make on this channel. I greatly appreciate you. Becoming a member is completely optional and unnecessary. I can't believe so many of you are members, and I really appreciate it. Anyway, I won't hold you up anymore. Enjoy the rest of the video. If you are considering dropping a like or subscribing, thank you very much. One thing I do want to touch on is gear, and I think gear is an important part of any MMO, more specifically any RPG. Depending on which MMO you're coming from, the term stat stick means something different. I originally heard it in Warframe, another MMO I have way too much time in, but as an example, stat stick is used both in Warframe and World of Warcraft, and they have wildly different meanings. But it also means something a little more general purpose. Essentially, it's just using an item because it has better statistics. In most MMOs, the deciding factor from swapping your sword to one you just looted off a boss is if the freshly looted sword has a larger damage number. If it doesn't, you probably won't use it. ESO might be the only MMO I've played where you actually have to question which gear you should be equipping. It's not as black and white like it is in SWTOR or LOTRO, where if number go up, it mean good. In ESO, are there larger numbers on the gear you pick up? Yes. But the difference is most looted gear from challenging enemies or quest rewards are part of item sets. Item sets are not a foreign concept to MMOs. In fact, most games do have them. ESO just happens to be the industry opposite, meaning if you look at all possible loot gathered in any situation, for most games, 90% of the loot are just stat sticks with no flavor. Even if you look at Skyrim, most gear you can collect are just flat armor figures or damage values. Occasionally you'll find interesting items like Daedric artifacts or maybe a unique enchantment. Anyway, as I was saying, in ESO I'd argue around 20 to 30% of the items found in the world are your regular bland stat sticks. The rest are set items. Each zone in the game has 3 or more item sets, usually light, medium, and heavy. That doesn't even count the 3 crafting stations in each zones for entirely new item sets. Each dungeon usually has 3 item sets, each raid has a bunch of item sets, you get the point. As of 2021, which is the earliest statistic I could find, there are over 473 armor sets in the Elder Scrolls Online. I'll be honest, most are pretty basic, at least from what I've experienced in the base game. But the system makes you think before equipping your next item. Yeah, this dagger you found might be better, but it breaks up your 5-piece set bonus. Maybe you should hold on to it for now and try and collect more set pieces that match the dagger. Having a majority of all gear fall into a designated set allows the designers to infuse the gear with more personality that matches the zone, or maybe matches with your character aesthetic. For that reason, I think ESO has one of the best gear systems implemented in any MMO I've played so far. The sheer amount of collecting you can do to fill out your sticker book of gear is phenomenal, and even if an item set isn't exactly what you're looking for, this gear system allows you to keep your options open, and it encourages you to have fun by trying out something new. And if you think that's too big of a change, or you'd prefer your classic MMO number value experience, you can still find that gear in ESO too. Alright, we're jumping into another divisive topic. Let's talk about the combat in the Elder Scrolls Online. If you've ever heard of this game, odds are you've probably heard something about its combat. To say it's extremely divisive is an understatement. You have people willing to die on both hills for the combat in this game, and now underqualified me is coming along to drop my take. Let's start by taking a look at ESO's predecessors, more specifically the single-player Elder Scrolls games that this combat is inspired from. Since I have more experience with Skyrim, I'll speak on that front, but Oblivion was my first Elder Scrolls game. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, you have to look at the building blocks of combat for those games and understand they are extremely basic. You have health, mana, and stamina, a staple in most RPGs. For melee combat, you have light attacks, heavy attacks, and blocking/bashing, basically on par with Minecraft in terms of complexity. Magic is a little more complicated, of course, but where Skyrim shines in comparison to ESO is its flexibility in the sandbox world. You could make someone levitate to outer space, you could Fuso-Da someone through a bunch of boxes, the combat has real-time weight, and this doesn't exist in the Elder Scrolls Online. If you had a panel of RPG experts judging a game for its acclaimed combat, and they were comparing flagship titles against games like Skyrim and Oblivion, I strongly believe the Bethesda games would be nowhere near the top of that list. In fact, it'd probably be in the bottom half. Skyrim, for example, is extremely basic in terms of combat. There's no dodging, there's no combos, bosses tend to be very surface level in terms of attack patterns, danger is artificial, as you can pause the game and eat 50 pumpkins to heal. Is the combat system creative? Absolutely. Is it fun? I wouldn't have 1,000 hours in it if it wasn't. But is it an objectively strong combat system in terms of design and complexity? I would say no. There's a reason most of the top mods for Skyrim are combat enhancers. When you look at ESO, which is built on similar combat building blocks as the single-player titles, but you remove most of the creativity, purpose, and interactivity with the world, you get something that feels a little floaty. Enemies don't really feel like enemies. They sort of feel like objects you need to click away in an idle game, which is odd for an action combat system. I think ESO is technically considered hybrid since there are tab-targeted abilities, but 90% of the combat is action. So if I had to put into words why I think the combat feels weird in the Elder Scrolls Online, it's because ESO is an action combat game, but the combat interaction feels like a tab target game. If you think of a regular enemy interaction in any tab target game and ESO, they're both essentially the same thing. They walk up to you, they get within attack range, and they start hitting you. Once you kill them, they plop down in place, and you can walk over and loot them. This feels normal for a tab target game. You don't expect that much interaction with your enemy. You don't expect them to ragdoll. It's a typical combat exchange. But in ESO, which I argue has a much more immersive combat system, you expect more, but you don't get it. You get the boilerplate MMO combat interaction with the same death animations, the same combat animations. It feels off-putting and awkward. My suggestion to fix this for ESO is to have more combat animations with enemy NPCs. Specifically, I think more death animations would be easier to implement because they kind of already exist in the game. If you kill someone with a two-handed weapon, they should fly back or be slammed into the ground violently. These animations already exist in the game, but they're tied to abilities or heavy attacking someone who's already stunned. Ironically, if you see an enemy charging up a heavy attack and you fail to block or bash, you get knocked back and pushed down. But it doesn't happen when you heavy attack them, which feels really awkward and imbalanced. I get the complications for implementing that interactivity for bosses, but if I heavy attack a trash mob like a crab in the head with a warhammer, I expect it to explode or at least hit the ground or maybe even flinch for a second. Right now you can fight most trash mobs in ESO and they have sometimes a weird twitching animation, but most of the time they ignore it like they're not being attacked at all. Anyway, that's my suggestion to help make the combat feel like it has a little more weight. I tried to provide solutions that already use in-game animations, so you can't write them off as outlandish or not possible in the comments. I do of course understand it would take work to implement it, but it would add some much-needed interaction for this action combat system, which seems to be universally disliked by most people who try it. Oh boy, Audacity says I've been recording audio for 45 minutes right now. Hopefully I've edited that down a bit, because that would be a long-ass video. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the Elder Scrolls Online's races and classes and how they play a part in this massive multiplayer experience. All races in this game have a racial skill tree, which generally have 4 nodes inside them. Most of these skills are just stat increases, plus 1,000 stamina or reduce the cost of spells by 3%, boilerplate MMO passives that really only mean something to the hardcore players who may want to squeeze an extra 3 to 4% DPS. Now, there are a few hidden gems which I think are much more in line with what you'd expect from an RPG. Argonians swim like double the speed of everyone else, Wood Elves take less fall damage and have a really small stealth detection radius, Dark Elves take very little damage from lava and have really high flame damage resistance, Orcs get bonuses to crafting and have a rage mechanic to heal when doing damage. You get my point. These racial skills are much more interesting and reflect the race's environment with a tangible bonus you can actually notice and observe in the world. But unfortunately, most of the racial skills come down to simple passive stat increases, which aren't really as fun. The classes, on the other hand, do present quite a bit more variety. This game does a fantastic job ensuring any class can do anything. You want to tank as a Nightblade, which is ESO's rogue class, you can do that, and they're actually pretty good. You want a DPS as the Holy Templar, which is ESO's priest class, you can do that too, and you can out-DPS some of the classes that were meant to be damage dealers. All of the ESO classes are essentially divided into 3 skill trees. Each is generally centered around one of the Holy Trinity aspects: tanking, support, and damage. For example, I play an Arcanist. The first tree, Herald of the Tome, is the damage tree. Basically, all abilities in here focus on doing damage or giving myself buffs to do more damage. Curative Rune Forms is another tree, and it's more focused on supportive abilities, things like healing, buffs, and mobility. The final tree is called Soldier of Apocrypha, which is the tank tree. It has taunts, debuffs, shields, and crowd control. Not to mention, each weapon in this game has a different skill line. So damage staffs, healing staffs, one-handed, two-handed, dual-wield, bows, you name it. Each of those has their own skill line with active abilities, passives, and ultimate abilities too. Even armor types have abilities and passives as well. What I'm trying to get at is that ESO's class system is much more liquid compared to other MMOs. There's no strict roles associated with any of the classes because you can always respec and swap into a different skill line or even use a mix of multiple. You could even roleplay as a regular person with no class and just use weapon skills and attributes. That's completely possible. There's 7 classes, each with 3 trees, which is a total of 21 different skill lines. In my 100 hours of game time, I've basically explored one of those, which is the DPS skill line for my Arcanist, and I just shoot my massive Dragon Ball Z laser at people. So if you're a new player, pick what class aesthetic you like the most first, because each class can do every role. I don't know enough about all the classes yet to give you any insights on the meta. People keep telling me the Arcanist, which is the class I play, is by far the strongest in the game. I didn't know that when I picked it. I've just been a huge Hermaeus Mor fan ever since the Dragonborn Skyrim DLC, which goes to show you, I picked a class because of its aesthetic, I liked how it looked, and I liked how it ties into the lore, and I'm having a great time. Just pick whatever you want. The final chapter in this long-ass story is going to be about the community. As someone who's been making content for this game for the past 2 months or so, I've come across quite a wide variety of characters. There are people who hate this game. Hate it. I have never seen such discontent for a video game ever. There are people who hate ESO so much they leave hateful comments against me for even giving it a platform on my channel. I've gotten accused of being on Bethesda's payroll, 2 separate instances of someone wishing cancer upon me for making a video on ESO, but the most common thing I get is people just tell me to stop playing it, almost like a friendly warning. This game is horrible, do not waste your time. Let me make this clear. I am not sponsored by Bethesda at all. In fact, I'd probably turn down a partnership with them because I think my viewers value the unbiased integrity I bring to my reviews. To burn the bridge even further, ZeniMax is well known for deleting criticism and critiques from their community on their official forums. They ban people for criticizing the current game state, and these people often waive their ban reports like a badge of honor on the Reddit for saying something most games would consider constructive feedback. Alright, someone on the Bethesda payroll isn't going to say that, okay? I will. Now, unfortunately, the Reddit is also not super great for new players. It's a 10-year-old game. I'm sure people over there dislike the same new player questions they get over and over. I would be annoyed too. If you do decide to go to the Reddit and ask a question about general gameplay or something you're confused about as a new player, you'll probably be downvoted to oblivion, no pun intended, and you'll be lucky if you get an answer. At least that was my experience. Maybe you'll get lucky and the time you post your comment, there's a group of nicer people online. That's just not my experience with the Reddit. I'm extremely fortunate to have this YouTube platform now, and if you look at my community post, it's basically all questions about ESO. I have a wonderful community here who have been integral to my enjoyment of this game. I usually stream once a week, and somehow over 100 people usually tune in, which is wild, by the way, 100 concurrent viewers. What's going on? But I'm not kidding, at least 50% of my stream time is asking my audience questions about the game. So I recognize that I'm in an extremely privileged position because my community are all super nice and they're always happy to help me. Unfortunately, I do not think you're going to feel that same experience as a new player unless you exclusively look for help in-game. Now, the in-game player base is remarkably different than the out-of-game player base. People are so kind in this game and they're almost always willing to take time out of their days to help new players. I have people come up to me randomly in-game and ask if I need help. I'm sort of a high level now, and because of my self-imposed challenge, I always have horrible gear, and people often whisper to me on the street and ask if I need help understanding how armor sets work or how to get better gear. The in-game community is fantastic, so if you have questions, you can ask in-game, but if you're looking for help outside of the game, I'd recommend watching YouTube videos or joining a Twitch live stream. Before we wrap this up, there's 2 things I can't comment on, and that's PvP and the monetization of the Elder Scrolls Online. I bought the game for about $15 on Steam, and I've only been doing the base game content. In 150 hours or so, I've been able to do 30% of the base game. Keep in mind, I do 100% each zone, so if you're just doing the story content, that's going to be way lower. So a conservative estimate, I'd say there's about 400 hours of content if you choose to get the cheaper $5 base game package. I, however, bought the Necrom Collection, which includes, at least to my understanding, all the major DLC this game has ever put out. Now, fortunately, my dad let me use his already existing account, and he had a bunch of the minor DLC that's sold separately. Between him and my #1 most glorious donator, Sergeant Jeff Mongoose, I now own every single story content DLC this game has to offer. Every single zone you can see on the map, I own. Someone in the comments probably has a better idea of how much all the DLC in the game costs. If I was to guess, I'd say like $500. I've taken a gander at the premium shop, but I don't really have a comment on it because I've never really had to use it. Similar situation for PvP. I've never tried it yet, and I can't really give an opinion on it. I do plan to explore these areas in the game sometime in the future, but for now it's not high on my list while I complete the base game. I think I've said everything I wanted to as a new player trying ESO for the first time 10 years late. This MMO clearly has a lot of history with the game and the player base that I'm not privy to, but I'm learning as I go. Overall, my recommendation is that you gotta try this game at least once. Go slow, play by yourself, and pick a storyline to follow like I did. I truly believe that's where you're gonna get most of your enjoyment from. There's a billion quests, and the game constantly nags you to pick up new missions to stray you from your current path, to try out a DLC area or new content, but if you follow a questing guide online or through YouTube, you can really improve your experience. As an Elder Scrolls fan, I regret not getting into this game earlier. The story content, lore, and implications of some of the narratives are immensely interesting to me. Most of the content in this game is story content. About 80 to 90% of any zone was essentially created around questing and storytelling. There's some dungeons, delves, or world bosses you'll find along your journey, but trust me, I have a massive Excel sheet. Those make up a very small amount of your time adventuring. This game is much more centered around the casual or single-player experience, and although I'm sure it's fun to play with friends or in big groups of people, I don't think that's the core focus of the Elder Scrolls Online. I'm standing by my original statement in describing ESO as an online RPG more so than your typical MMO. If you're looking for a game with great storytelling, strong world building, interesting items, and mythical artifacts, along with an insanely flexible class system, I'd highly recommend ESO. If you're looking for a game with more focus on teamwork, communication, challenging content, strong progression systems, clear class identities, and an in-game sense of community, I'd recommend looking elsewhere. But that's all I have for you today. It looks like my Audacity says I've been recording for 1 hour and 19 minutes. I really hope the video's not that long. But regardless, I really hope you do enjoy the video. This is probably going to take me like 40 hours to edit and make, but hopefully it'll provide a valuable insight. If you're feeling up to it, make sure to drop a like on the video if you want to show your appreciation. If you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave them down below. So have a great rest of your week, and I hope to see you in the next one.